Northwest 200 is the fastest track in the world.
It's not just a motorcycle race.
We were always trying to make money to keep the race going. It's everything really. I just can't imagine not being there.
Complete and utter devastating shock.
Should we carry on? Should we pull the plug and leave it?
The race wasn't run, and it looked as if it would never be run again.
The Northwest 200 is now Ireland's largest outdoor sporting event, attracting thousands of race fans and families to the north coast. Roads are closed on the triangle between Portrush, Portstewart and Coleraine for the thrills and spills of pure road racing. But the story of the Northwest began nearly a century ago. The young men of the 1920s were the first generation who could afford to own motorbikes and wanted to go fast. But where? With such poor roads, the only place was on the beach. And so the city of Derry Motor Club organised speed trials on McGilligan Strand.
They used to put a set of posts down, and of course to keep the riders from running onto the other. Oh, they might run out in front of them, a seagull. or a wave come out. There's nothing to crash against.
Up to the 1920s, the only place where you could road race was the Isle of Man. But the passing of the 1922 Road Races Act gave the Derry Motor Club the shrewd idea of holding an international event, weeks before the well-established TT.
Every top rider that you could mention, they all regarded the Northwest as being very, very important because it was just before the TT. So they could use the Northwest to get their bikes fitted and get themselves ready to go road racing.
So on Saturday the 20th of April 1929, the first Northwest was held as thousands of race fans came to the north coast. One of the many spectators was a then 12-year-old John McKay.
We heard the noise of the motorbikes and we headed for the direction where the bikes was, down at Melbourne Corner. They're just ordinary bikes that they're out there working, and then they fixed them up for racing. And then they had a spanner stuck on the side of their boot there for changing the plugs.
After 200 miles and over 3 gruelling hours, the fans who turned out to see the big names compete cheered on the 8 riders who managed to finish, including 2 local winners, Malcolm McQuigg and Billy McCracken, seen here in 1979 at the 50th anniversary of that famous first race.
We were getting away up to the 90s, and we were flying in those days at that speed.
In 1930, a new club was formed, and the start-finish was moved to Portstewart. Throughout the 30s, 2 of the big names were Dubliner Stanley Woods and Scotland's Jimmy Guthrie, who had raced against Englishman Graham Walker, a winner of the event in 1931.
And my father was in the Norton Works team in the early days, and they were great personal friends. They got on very well together off the track, and they raced fairly and very quickly against each other on the track.
The 500cc event of 1930 was won by Ernie Knott, who was awarded the impressive sum of £10. Stanley Woods came third and got £3. In 1935, the year Jimmy Guthrie had his second win, King George V's Silver Jubilee was celebrated in Coleraine. By 1939, with the Second World War looming, Ernie Lyons, aka the Flying Farmer, travelled up from County Kildare and won the last race before the war.
We should never lose sight of the fact that although motorcycle racing is hazardous now, it was infinitely more hazardous then. They not only had to be very good riders, they had to be very brave riders as well.
But tragedy struck when English rider Norman Wainwright was the first man to be killed at the Northwest. Racing didn't resume after the war until 1947. Winner Belfast rider Artie Bell was congratulated by Lord Brookborough, the then Prime Minister of Northern Ireland.
Unforgettable, that's what you are.
The Northwest of 1951 managed to attract the world-famous Jeff Duke, who won the 500cc event.
Jeff Duke in them days was the rider to have, and for them to pull the likes of Jeff Duke back in the 50s, they'll just give the meeting a complete boost.
Thousands more spectators poured into the holiday towns of Portrush and Portstewart to see these international stars.
I worked the local Woolworths store. We were so busy. The ladies and the children, a lot of them stopped in the town. And I was in charge of the toy counter, and you had to go back and restock up. It was really, really busy. And it brought a lot to the town even then, so it did.
By the 1950s, the Northwest had come a long way from that first race in 1929, but despite the appearance of world-famous competitors, the fans continued to have unrivaled access to riders and their machines.
In those days, the pits were all in the middle of the town on a place called High Road, and we stood at the pits, which was on an embankment, a grass embankment, and we could watch the race the whole way down there, and it was a great atmosphere.
Belfast 1953, and a month after her coronation, the Queen visited Stormont. At the Northwest, English visitor Arthur Wheeler won that year, and returned in 1989 for the 60th anniversary parade.
I'm extremely pleased to be here, and the reception of my many friends is absolutely overwhelming.
The flag's up.
By the late 50s, the bikes were now capable of lapping at over 100 miles per hour, and the honour of being the first to achieve this went to Jack Brett, who in 1958 beat Scotland's hero Bob McIntyre in the 500cc race.
Through Henry's Corner with his tricky exit, and a lamppost in your way if you overdo it, McIntyre and Brett are quickly leaving the field far behind.
Also in 58, a young Belfast man, Sammy Miller, takes on rising English star and future world champion Mike Hailwood.
And in the 250s, Mike Hailwood is just holding off Sammy Miller.
On the last lap coming down into Portrush, I made my move and luckily got past him, and then it was flat out along the coast road, head down, and I managed to get over the line just in front of him.
And Sammy Miller gets the 250cc verdict after a photo finish with Mike Hailwood.
After nearly 30 years, the Northwest had grown into a truly international event. And so the dedicated supporters had to raise more funds to keep it going, as they've continued to do ever since.
They ran an entertainment committee, and we ran a dance every month. We had the old-fashioned jumble sale and things like that. We were always trying to make money to keep the race going.
In 1959, Belfast man Tommy Robb became the first rider to win 2 races on the same day. Tommy recalls a near-fatal incident from the following year.
We were probably 7 or 8 abreast across the road, and as I looked ahead of me, I could see a car driving towards us on the road. And I started to move to the left, and I leaned against, I think, Bob McIntyre, Bob leaned against Alistair King. Alistair leaned against John Hartle. By the time we got level with the car, I could see the fellas' eyes pulling out of their sockets as we went thundering past. Billy Hutton was the travelling marshal who follows the bikes round. He went over to the car driver, who was now sitting at 45 degrees up the bank, and the chap in the car leaned out the window and he said, "Excuse me." Billy stopped the bike, looked around, he said, "When you're coming round on the next lap, could you bring me a packet of fags?"
We're all going on a summer holiday, no more working for a week or two.
The holidaymakers of 1963 had to do without racing at the Northwest, the organisers blaming a clash with the live televised FA Cup final.
I think there's something more to it than blaming the coverage for the football and different things. We mightn't have had the money there at that time to run it. The race wasn't run, and it looked as if it would never be run again.
After 34 years of unstinting effort by organisers and loyal supporters, it looked like the Northwest would be consigned to sporting history. But at a meeting of the Motorcycle Union of Ireland, one man stood up.
We run the Northwest 200, and everybody stared and said, "Who is this?" And it was a man called Jubilee Maxwell, who was the head of the Coleraine Motor Club, and that they would hopefully keep it back on track again, which they did.
Thanks to the dedication of the Coleraine Club members, the Northwest was brought back from the brink, and in 1964 a huge crowd was treated to an Irish clean sweep, including 2 wins by Belfast man Ralph Bryans.
I just signed a contract with Honda, and that was the first I'd seen the machines. So we managed to get them running, and I was fortunate enough to be able to win both races.
It's not unusual to be...
And Bushmills farmer Dick Creeth was the first Ulster winner in the premier event since Artie Bell won in 1950.
But when I see you hanging about with anyone...
Couldn't believe it when I won the race. Still found it hard to believe, yeah.
Dick returned the following year, and despite marshals having to contend with several incidents, including a South African rider's bike catching fire in Port Stewart, Dick went on to repeat his success.
For winning the race, I got £50, and for the fastest lap, I got £10, and second handicap, I got £5. I think I come home with £65.